Did you know that popular 3D anime games love posting their official models for everyone to download completely free? All that's made available is the finished product, so any trade secrets that would be in there are long gone because people don't know the actual processes used to model them. So surely their secrets are safe, right? Not exactly. There are certain ways that we can mimic or reveal their techniques. So on today's episode, a technique used to increase mesh detail in important places.
Nice.
Why triangles are a necessary evil in the world of 3D, and how I use the SpongeBob technique to uncover Hoyoverse's secret sauce. Anime style models usually have highly contrasting mesh density. They're fairly low density in most of the body, but this density can abruptly double in areas like the face, boobs, or actually this butt. This localized density it's useful for adding structural support for deformation that is common in those areas, while not blowing up the total polygon count. Actually, a really great example for that would be Evelyn, because for this, right, they just subdivided everything around the butt to make it match the butt's vertices, but here on Evelyn's model, they did something cheeky. They increased the density more locally while keeping the surrounding areas very low budget. But one masterful thing they did was they incorporated their triangle merge down to flow into the actual outfit mesh. So here's another good example from Duet Night Abyss, where they'll have to go from high density here to low density here. So they're going to use triangles, and the outfit itself has these natural triangles in it. So that's a nice clever way to terminate those extra loops into triangles that flow into the quads of a lower density area. So increased local mesh density is made possible with triangles, but triangles are often misunderstood. This is because quads, or any face with 4 edges, are the optimal shape when it comes to modeling. Why? Because you can loop cut across them very cleanly, whereas triangles will block loop cuts like this. For some reason, people have oversimplified this to square always good and triangle always bad. But triangles are helpful. Necessary even. You just need to know when and where to use them. When modeling bodies, modelers usually apply a subdivision surface modifier to the body once, giving it a nice curvature and ensuring it has enough faces to work with. When quads get subdivided, they subdivide cleanly into more quads. When tris get subdivided, they also turn into quads, but the result can be a little messy and will definitely need some cleanup after the fact just to make it look more neat. The subdivided quads, of course, still loop cut cleanly, while subdivided tris can also be loop cut because they're quads now. It's just that the routing might be a little unpredictable unless you plan for them, and you specifically use them to route certain parts of the mesh. But after you've applied the subdiv and you've done all the loop cuts that you need, when you get to your finishing touches, you can start introducing tris to clean up the model and lower your density in certain areas, sometimes by merging, and sometimes you add. So triangles at a certain point are a very useful way to increase or decrease density in areas that you choose. That being said, let's talk about mesh density. Depending on the density of your pre-subdiv mesh, the resulting post-subdiv may not have enough loops to support good curvature on the mesh, leading to jagged forms. Now, we don't want to loop cut all the way so that it goes all across the entire body like this. So what do? The solution is actually pretty simple. In edit mode, we select the entire area of interest. In this case, the whole breast. Thankfully, our mesh has them quite isolated. So let's grab the entire thing and then invert our selection. Then press H to hide the inverted selection. Then we just add some loop cuts until we reach the desired density, and that it can support the curvature and give us more detail for deformation. Slide the new loops around to maintain proper spacing. The relax tool will be super useful for smoothing out these new curves. Make sure the loop tools add-on is on in your preferences. Then we can just go over all the loops and apply the relax operation on them. We don't really have to do them on these ones in the center. Now relax it vertically, horizontally, and around the outer edge itself. Now you can press Alt-H to unhide. Your model will now have n-gons around the breast, because we added loop cuts to an isolated region. N-gons are any faces with 5 or more edges, and we can fix that by using our knife tool to turn them into quads or triangles. You can terminate them into the mirrored edge. And here's another way you can do it. Terminating them right under the breast, which doesn't have that many deforms. We can also cut and then dissolve certain edges to rearrange faces more neatly. And of course, we can also create some triangles and even slide those triangles in, making it look slightly more organized. Just make sure you find all the n-gons. There could be some sneaky ones that you miss. We'll make some final adjustments, and that looks a lot smoother than it did before. This is what I did to find out Hoyoverse's body modeling method, or at least a method that provides very similar results. Genshin Impacto recently released this adorable deer lady, so I grabbed her 3D model off of the official incentive page. Guide on how I get these models on screen and in my Discord always. And after I downloaded it, Lauma's model is really clean, and once I separate parts of her mesh that are occluding her body and hide them, we can see that her outfit is pretty skin tight, with her undergarments pretty much drawn onto the mesh itself. So this is really good for reverse engineering the body mesh. The first good thing to take note of is the edge flow. I like this belly/crotch area because it has this nice contour and it flows nicely into the hip edge flow, which is angled because the hips need that flexibility when the leg moves laterally. This angled edge flow tapers off into a straight once we get to the thighs. One key feature when we go back here and check out the bakery is that even though the hip edge flow had these angles, back here it's straight as well as on the sides. I then select these vertices and hide them. 99% of the time this ends in disappointment, but that's not going to stop me from trying. Anyways, what's next on the list is to separate the area of interest. So I go ahead and hide all of the other vertices and separate this part as much as possible. And the reason I'm going to focus on specifically this pelvic region today is because I struggle making them consistently, and my current method has this problem where the front of the thighs are angled when it should be straight, as what we saw earlier. Now I'm going to select every other edge that I see, both horizontally and vertically, across the mesh. I go to edge select mode, and once every other edge is selected, I press delete and select dissolve edges. Why do I do this? Because I'm under the strong assumption that their method is to box model a low poly body and then subdivide it once to make it smooth. So essentially what I'm doing is unsubdividing it so I can see what their low poly base looks like. And as you can see, there's still a lot of artifact edges left over, even after I snapped away half of the edge loops like Thanos, because it looks like after they applied subdivision surface, they added more details and added more cuts. But that's okay, the base form has actually become pretty clear. So I just continue to clean it up until I arrive at what I believe to be their low poly base model. This is kind of like when SpongeBob reverse engineered a circle. So now that I've stripped it down to something that looks like it makes sense, the next step is actually to recreate this from scratch. Because the goal is not just to copy a mesh, but to recreate a simple method that is improvable and that I can share with you. Two key parts that I made sure to preserve in this recreation is the diagonal flow around the hips and the routing on the thighs, crotch, and belly made possible by that single triangle you see on top of the thigh. Let's recreate this. Whenever I do a recreation, I break down the mesh into simple shapes and model the obvious parts first, and then it gets easier the more you go along, like a Sudoku puzzle. So if we start with the front crotch area, it's just a rectangle with 3 faces. So easily enough, we start with a single point, turn it into 2 points, and then extrude it downwards, then loop cut it twice. And of course, we'll take note of the subtle shapes and angles and just move the points into place. One part down and I move to the bottom where I can see that this is also a rectangle of 3 faces. So same thing, looking up from the bottom Z angle, I extrude that part, loop cut it into 3 separate parts. Looks like these points are wrapping around the leg, so let's move those into place, just imitating the shape of what I see in my reference. Now the pelvis should be curvy, not cubey, so let's move those points around. And now looking at the back, you guessed it. It's another rectangle split into 3 faces. So let's go ahead and do that as well and move it into place. I should also note that at this stage, don't worry about the exact shape too much. We can always go back and fix it later. A solid and evenly spaced mesh like this is very easy to tweak into its intended shape. Before I forget, let's add that mirror modifier. I recommend using Auto Mirror. To enable it, go to Preferences, Add-ons, just make sure it's ticked, and that should come with Blender. You don't have to download anything. We'll also be using it again later. Just moving these points around, prepare for the front hip edge flow. Then I look from the top and I see that the top loop is basically an open 2x2. So I just need to extrude out from the top faces a total of 3 new points. Now looking from the top, this part will have 2 edges on the top hand side, left hand side, and bottom side. That's the opening for the torso complete. And now if we look at the side of this object, we'll see another simple shape, a 2x3 rectangle. So by now you know the drill. Extrude that out, loop cut it, and curve it. So that's the entire side of it complete. Let's fill this top space in between the front and the side. And then the weirdest part will just be this triangle, which is needed for that diagonal edge flow. Then I'm gonna fill in these 2 faces by creating the edge first, loop cutting it in half, selecting 2 vertices from the end of the triangle, and then pressing F twice to fill those in. Same technique down here, but with 3 faces. So I press F to create the edge, loop cut twice, select the edge from the neighboring face, and press F 3 times to fill it in. The hard part is already complete. Here in the back, we just gotta fill in these faces. And it's just 3 basic faces, nothing fancy. And after doing that, we already have our loop for the legs, we just gotta fix its shape. Make sure the Loop Tools add-on is on in your preferences. Then with that leg opening loop selected, go to the Edit tab on your right hand side, and under Loop Tools, press circle and rotate it into place. Now extrude that down once and scale it down on the Z axis so that it becomes flat. So now what we have is a recreation of the mesh face for face. But obviously the proportions and curves are not the same. So we go into sculpt mode and move these points around using the grab tool as kind of like a glorified proportional editing tool. Since it's a low poly structure right now, there's not much that can go wrong here. And all I have to do is push in the front and push out the back. And this is the point where you add the subdivision surface modifier. Now it'll be a lot easier to visualize the curves. All we really need to do at this point is to capture the basic silhouette of the pelvis. We can add the finer details later. And don't worry, we can always continue to tweak with sculpt mode at any point. Let's do a quick check to see if our normals are facing the right way by applying Shade Smooth. If it looks like this, that means the normals are flipped in different directions and we need to use Recalculate outside. Then I'll just continue sculpting out these curves. We could use an extra loop cut here on the thigh so that we can pinch them inwards. And this is about as much as we can do until we finally apply that subdiv, because we'll need a few more loops to work with in order to get the details for the butt. Now, if you've been following along, I highly recommend that before you apply modifiers, create a backup save or duplicate your mesh as a backup. Especially if you're planning to wait for the rest of the body tutorial, which will drop in a few days. I usually model whole body before I apply subdiv, but today this is just an example of how I reverse engineer, so I'm only focusing on one part. All that being said, I'll now apply the mirror and subdiv modifiers. Mirror should be on top or else it will be like this. And this is okay because we can just press the auto mirror button again to get our mirror back after we apply the subdiv. As you can see, after it's applied, it's already pretty similar to our target mesh, and with a few finishing touches, we should be able to get there. Let's dissolve specifically this vertex where the triangle was at, and knife it like this. Then up here on this pole, let's move it that way, and then knife it like that. Those are the 2 main changes at the front needed to get that contour in that belly button crotch area. Then from the bottom, let's knife out an extra edge, which will be required to create extra detail for the butt. I'll also knife this area to create the bottom fold of the cheek. I'll move those vertices under manually in edit mode, and then use the grab tool in sculpt mode to pull out the vertices that are above it. Then I'll just go over these edge loops with Loop Tools Relax, because some of them were not looking too smooth. Then I'm gonna move that loop in that I created earlier inward to create that final detail. This is the final result, and while it's not exactly the same, I think the main aspects of it were captured, like this contour, the slanted hip crease angle from the front, but on the back it's straight. So I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. Probably the best part about this workflow is cutting out the initial high to low phase of sculpting and retopologizing entirely. So what I mean by that is, before I studied gacha models, my recommendation was the sculpt and retopologize method. And my particular method was very convoluted. It involved doing a low poly blockout, turning that into a dense mesh, sculpting that mesh like a sculpture, surface retopologizing that sculpture, and then doing the final tweaks and details. Since then, I've seen that 3D anime bodies don't really need that level of detail. So while that might be better suited for more realistic bodies, I think for lower detail anime bodies, my preferred method would be a low to high method without using retopo sculpt. Just box model, subdivide once, and then add in the details and finishing touches as you please. Anyways, thank you for watching. You're actually the GOAT if you made it this far into the video. If you enjoyed this, I have a lot more breakdowns of Pro 3D models and methods on my channel. And currently, I'm working on creating a full model using everything I've learned from Pro 3D models. And as you've seen in this video, we're currently working on recreating her body mesh. So next up will be the full main body tutorial, then hands and feet, then I'll go back and update the face tutorial as well, then move on to texturing, outfit design, rigging, and even exporting her into an actual game environment, trying to recreate a 3D gacha character as closely as possible. So if you'd like that, then do stay tuned. Thanks again, and as always, have yourselves a good night.